Andy Johnson, Minnesota State University. This is the Reading Instruction Show, and this is a recording of a webinar I did called the Neurocognitive Approach to Reading Instruction. The actual webinar, I had difficulties, so I am re-recording it, and these are the 4 parts that I'll be looking at today. So let's start out with the first part, the theory of reading. Now, there's 2 theories of reading. The first one we're going to look at is called the bottom-up theory of reading. The simple view of reading, stating that reading is merely sounding out words. It's decoding times language comprehension equals reading comprehension. Essentially, you sound stuff out, which is decoding. You listen to it in your head, and there you have reading comprehension. Nothing wrong with that as a theory. But there are weak and there are robust theories. This is a weak theory because there's many data points, much information that is unaccounted for. Based on the phonological processing model that says that reading is sounding out words, bottom up goes from the page to the thalamus up to the cortex. That is reading. You sound out the words and you listen to the words, you comprehend them. Phonological processing model. Words flow from the page to the eyeballs to the thalamus and up to the head. That is the bottom-up model. According to this model, readers who struggle are readers that have sounding out word deficits. They're not able to sound out words very good. So what do? You give them more sounding out word instruction, and that's the way to cure all struggling readers, just more sounding out word instruction. There you have it. But what usually happens, it's not very effective. Students get marginally better at sounding out words in isolation. In the short term, they get a short-term blip. But there's no long-term gain. They learn to sound out individual words here, but they're reading over there, and we very rarely read single words out of context. There is little transfer of these skills to authentic reading context or authentic text. And that's the purpose of reading. It's not to sound out word, but to create meaning with print. In the long term, there's no significant improvement in students' ability to create meaning with authentic text. That heavy focus on phonics doesn't mean that phonics is unimportant. In this model, bottom up, phonological processing model, simple view of reading, data unaccounted for. Proficient readers look at only 60% of the words on the page. The rest are passed over. We'll take a look at that in just a minute. It does not account for the idea that when we read, we don't move from left to right in a nice smooth line. Our brain is tricking us into thinking that way. When we read, our eyes do not move in a straight line across the page. They make skips from word to word called saccades. They also skip words, repeat words, and fixate on words. And these blurs of the text are intentional, and you'll see why that is a little bit later on. As well, it does not account for the fact that proficient readers often insert words that are semantically correct or syntactically correct, that they make sense within the sentence. If I'm reading orally, the boy ran down the road, but I say the boy run down the road, that's semantically correct. It still makes sense. So I'm not reading at surface level, I'm reading for deep meaning, and that's a good thing. As well, struggling readers often insert words that are syntactically correct, make sense in terms of grammar. That tells us, that's one of the clues that tell us that we're using more than letter clues to create meaning with text. And reading is creating meaning with text. The simple view of reading also does not account for the fact that we have almost 10 times more information flowing from the cortex down to the thalamus, cortical-thalamic connections, than from the thalamus up to the cortex, thalamocortical connections. almost 10 times more information is flowing down from our cortex where we hold all the information than is flowing up. We're using what's in our head to help us understand the information that's coming in. It also does not account for the fact that information in the cortex is used to direct the eyes during reading, not the text, but information is using to direct the eyes where to go. Now, the neurocognitive model does account for all this stuff. According to this model, reading is creating meaning with print, not sounding out words, but creating meaning. During the process of reading, information comes up from the page to the thalamus, and there are 3 cueing systems used to recognize words. Yes, phonics, also syntax, and semantics. More on that in a minute. But we use what's in our head to help us make sense of what's on the page. What is in the head is incredibly important. I can read Latin, but I'm not reading, I'm just sounding out words. I can read stuff related to reading quite quickly because there's lots in the head about reading. But the same head, the same brain, reading stuff about financial planning, very difficult. Very hard time creating meaning. We use what's in our head to help us create meaning with text. Proficient readers don't look at every word, don't look at every letter. They use very minimal letter clues. Once upon a time, there was a handsome prince. He lived in a castle. All the vowels except the initial vowels have been removed from this. Yet we can create meaning with text. We can read this. How important are vowels, our diphthongs? No, they're important, but not overly so. The brain uses 3 cueing systems to recognize words, a system, various parts, interconnected and interdependent systems working together to recognize words. And the cueing system is not a strategy, it's not an approach, it's not a method, it's a recognition that our brain uses multiple sources of information to recognize words. And reading is creating meaning, not sounding out words, not recognizing words. The 3 cueing system, semantics, which is meaning. We use the context of the sentence to recognize what on the page. Most people insert words. The monkey ate a Most people insert banana. Semantics, context, helps us recognize words. And there's a difference between recognizing words and identifying words. We'll get to that in a minute. Syntax is grammar or word order. She blanked down the hill. Most of us know it's a verb of some sort. These are interconnected, interdependent systems. And then the phonological or graphophonetic system, letters and sounds. This is the least efficient in terms of cognitive processing space, in terms of time. Working memory is limited. We can hold things for about 15 seconds, and we can hold 7 plus or minus 2 bits of information for about 15 seconds. Now, we can hold 15 letters, 15 words, or 15 ideas. If we're focusing on 7 words, ideas, or words, ideas, or letters, if we're focusing on letters, we don't have enough space to focus on idea, on meaning, That's why it's important that we use these other systems. It's the least efficient. If we're focusing just on letters, we don't have enough time to focus on meaning. Does not mean that phonics is not important. Simply means that phonics should not be overemphasized. Other things to consider. During reading, our brain uses as few letters as possible to recognize words. As few as absolutely possible. We are not, and this is an empirical fact, we're not looking letter by letter. We're not even looking word by word. We're using what's on our head, that's called a schema, the file folder in our head, to recognize words. We don't read letter by letter in a serial fashion. Take too long. Use too much space in working memory. We use minimal letter clues and our eyes Do not stop on every word. And we'll show you a little bit about that in a minute. Now, this whole idea that we sound out every word starting with the first letter. Okay, you think so? Well, sound this word out. S. Okay? S, st, s, t, st, 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 sta, sta, sta. Stam, stam. The word is stam. Stamp. Oh, the word is stamp. That's it. Stampy. The word is stampy. Yes. Stamped. The word is stamped. Of course, the word is stamped. He stamped the envelope. Oh, stampede. Now, if you thought that we look at every word letter by letter, if that's how we read, you are much mistaken and misinformed. We always see words holistically within a context. The buffalo started to stampede. We didn't say the buffalo started to stam, stamp, stampa, stamped, stampede. We didn't do that. We saw it holistically within the context of the sentence. And we always see words within a context of something, either a sentence, a sign, or a product label. We don't see words. We rarely, if ever, encounter words floating in isolation, floating in space someplace. How important are vowels? Vowels are not very important. Consonants are more important. Doesn't mean we shouldn't teach them, but they're not really very dependable in the English language. You still disagree? Think that vowels are so important? Okay, here's a sentence with all the consonants, just the vowels. Tell me if you know what it means. Just the vowels. I'm guessing nobody can. All right? This is about bears. Now can you tell me? Yes, with the vowels removed, the big black bear ran through the woods. So, vowels are important, but consonants are much more important. Proof of the three cueing systems. And people still insist there's no such thing as the cueing systems. Okay, you can think that way. It's not what a body of research says, of course. And a cueing system is essentially multiple sources of information. Following paragraph contains 110 words. Read it as quickly as you can, and I'll stop it here and go ahead. Okay, we're assuming you stopped. Let's move on. Now, we're going to read the same 110 words. We should be able to read them faster because we've seen them before, right? Not necessarily. Away drove Ann car, his in jump could he as fast as ran Billy. What the heck, you say? Billy toward Stampede to start Buffalo the. Notice the difference in eye movement, how we kind of went word by word. Notice the difference in fluency. The first one we could read rather fluently. The second one we sounded like a struggling reader. We read it very choppily. Our pace was slower. We went back and forth with our eyes more instead of more smooth lines. There were more stumbles, miscues, and self-corrections. Why is that? The difference was word order. We couldn't use grammar or context or punctuation to figure out the meaning. If reading was simply sounding out words, your rate, accuracy, and fluency should have been the same with both paragraphs, but it was not. That's because we use syntax and semantics, as well as pragmatics, to create meaning with print. All right, little transition here. Two big ideas to take from this. Idea number one. Reading instruction and intervention should include activities that develop all three cueing systems to recognize words, not identify, but recognize. We need to include semantic activities, close and maze to develop context. Syntactic, writing and word order activities. And phonics, absolutely. Analytic, synthetic, large unit, all 4 types of phonics instruction. Reading instruction should have all of these. With science of reading, we tend to just have a lot of synthetic phonics. And by the way, the National Reading Panel says that all 4 of these are equally effective. Analytic is not more effective than synthetic. We tend to get just a whole bunch of this with science of reading and none of that, to the detriment. Idea number 2, beginning reading instruction should be meaningful, using authentic text to the greatest extent possible. Meaning that we have some isolated word study, but we should limit that to the greatest extent possible. We should use analytic phonics to study words in the context of a sentence or in a story to the greatest extent possible. All right, transition to our next thing. Eye movement and miscue analysis. This helps us understand. And by the way, understanding the process of how the brain creates meaning with print is essential in designing effective literacy experiences, effective literacy learning, effective reading instruction, and intervention. Understanding this is key. Get used to watching the eyeballs of your readers as they read. They tell you a lot. If they're processing the text, you can see them. If they're not, if they're struggling, you can see them move in a choppy line like that, word by word. Get used. That tells you a lot. Now, we perceive with our eyes, but we make sense with our brain. And whether we're looking at reality or stuff on the page, the environment does not give us all the information we need to make sense of the world in which we live. We use what's in our head to fill in the blanks. As we're looking at reality, as we're looking at anything, even if we think we're looking straight at something, our eyes do not maintain a steady gaze. Let me demonstrate. Take a minute, focus just on the blue circle, don't let your eyeballs move, and you notice the stuff around the peripheral begins to fade away. But if we allow our eyes to move again, it all becomes clear. What's happening there? Get to that in just a minute. Take a look at that picture. All right, now notice where your eyeballs are traveling as you're looking at that picture. Eyeballs are usually going like this. Why is that important? Oh, and by the way, next time you're driving down the road, notice where your eyeballs are moving. We think we're looking straight ahead, but our eyeballs are actually going like this, taking a series of snapshots and filling in the blanks. Let me explain. As we read and as we look at pictures, our eyeballs make little skips called saccades, and we skip over 30% of the words. We fixate on only about 60% of the words. That's where our eyes actually stop, but we also take regressions, a lot of regressions. So we don't move like this. We move in a flowing line like this, but we go back. Struggling readers read like this if you're looking at every single letter, and we don't like that. Why is this important? Why is the fixation important? We can only perceive 1 to 2% of our total vision. That's called the foveal. That's where it's clear. Foveal, when we perceive 3 regions, foveal, parafoveal, peripheral, foveal, we can see 3 to 6 letters clearly. This is our foveal. Parafoveal, not very clearly, and peripheral is everything else. And there's an example of what it looks like if we just kept our eyeballs looking straight. With this very small in-focus viewing area, how is anybody able to read more than 10 words per minute if we only had that real little foveal thing? If that was all we had to view the world and everything else was fuzzy? We use minimal letter and word clues, and our brain is filling in the blanks as we read. we can perceive 3 to 6 letters, but remember, 10 times more information is flowing from the head down than the text up. We use semantics and syntactic information to predict as we're reading. Our brain is a meaning-making, predicting machine. That's how we have learned to operate efficiently. We take in a minimum amount of data and we fill in the blanks. If I'm in the woods and someone told me there was bears around and I hear a big sound and see a black movement, I would not need to see the complete bear to know I needed to run. My head is filling in the blanks. Our brain is a meaning-making, predicting machine, not a sounding out word machine. We can only perceive that little snapshot. So our brain essentially, when we're looking at reality, at a picture, we're taking little snapshots, and we can only perceive that upon which we fixate. That's why that foveal is so important. We only perceive those 3 to 6 letters, and we're skipping over 30% of the words, and our brain is filling in the blanks. It's making us think that we're seeing them. 20 to 30% of the words are skipped. They're not fixated on while reading, and we can't really see it unless we stop and we fixate on it, unless our brain takes that little snapshot. So our brain is taking little snapshots as we read and filling in the blanks. We tend to skip more function words. Those are in the. They serve a grammatical function, sight word kinds of things. We skip fewer content words. Those are the big words that carry meaning. And again, brain imaging research, 10 times more information is flowing down. This top-down flow just makes it seem like we're seeing every word and every letter, but we're filling in the blanks. This is why when we're reading our own writing, we tend not to catch errors and mistakes because our brain is filling in the blanks, so we just don't see it. And why we often make meaningful miscues, because we're reading for deep meaning versus surface structure. Gestalt. Our brain has evolved to operate efficiently by taking just the minimal amount of data and filling in the blanks to create meaning. That's called Gestalt. We look for patterns and we fill in the blanks. We do that with reading. We do that with reality. We don't need complete information. Our brain operates more efficiently by taking in the salient details and filling in the blanks. All right, so based on that, what should a comprehensive literacy program look like? Comprehensive reading, comprehensive literacy instruction. Comprehensive means total or complete. And to help develop each student's full literacy potential, we want their reading instruction to be comprehensive, to be total and complete, not just partial. There are 12 essential elements. The first one is phonemic awareness. Phoneme is the smallest unit of sound within a word. And phonemic awareness means manipulating and identifying sounds within words. Usually this means blending and segmenting. Cat. What are the sounds you hear in cat? K, a, t. That's segmenting. What do you get if you add k, a, t? Cat. That's blending. These are the two we do most often. This is done in preschool, kindergarten, maybe first grade. But when children are reading comfortably at reading level 1, it should be discontinued. It's one of 12 elements, interacting, interdependent elements. Discontinued. And if children are reading just fine, they don't need phonemic awareness. Many children don't need phonemic awareness activities. Some do, so include it for those who need it. Phonics instruction and word work. Everybody believes that phonics instruction is important. Whether you teach balanced or structured literacy, whole language, basal, skills-based, literature-based 4 blocks, everybody believes that phonics should be included in a comprehensive approach to reading instruction. It's not the what of phonics, but it's the how. And how much phonics do you teach? By the way, phonics and word work also includes sight words. Sight words are the 100, 200 words that you recognize without without having to decode. Sight words are most frequent words like dolch or fry or xeno. Yes, there are some words that you should know on sight, but phonics. It's not the what. Everyone believes that phonics instruction is important, but it should not be the main thing, and it should certainly not be the only thing. But it should be part one of 12 elements. It shouldn't be the exclusive focus at any level. The impact of phonics instruction is inconclusive after first grade, says the National Reading Panel. Yet, what happens if we have a struggling reader? Well, they just get a whole bunch of phonics. And if that doesn't work, we give them more phonics instruction so it cannot work to an even greater level. Here's the thing. If intensive phonics instruction isn't working, time to try something else. Teachers need a lot of tools in their teacher toolbox. If the only tool you have is a hammer, all the world becomes a nail. If the only tool you have is phonics, all the world becomes a phonics worksheet. Just because that's all you know doesn't mean that that's all there is. There are different types of phonics instruction. The National Reading Panel again said each is equally important. The science of reading tends to focus only on synthetic phonics, putting words together, sounding it out. Analytic phonics is analyzing words we see. Embedded phonics, phonics within the context of authentic reading. Analogy phonics or large unit phonics, word families, patterns. What part do you recognize? Onset rhyme or word building, and phonics through spelling. Which one of these is most effective? Again, they're all equally effective. They should all be included equally in a comprehensive reading program. Activities and instruction to develop all three neurocognitive word recognition systems. Sometimes this is called a cueing system, but people get freaked out. Now, know this. A word recognition system, a cueing system, is not an approach. It's not a strategy. It's not a skill. We do not teach 3 cueing. It's not something you teach. It's merely a recognition that our brain uses multiple sources of information as we are looking to identify words while we're reading. Our brain uses various interacting and interconnecting systems to recognize words, and that's different from identifying. Phonological, semantic, we use close and maze to develop that, and syntactic information. We use writing and word order activities to develop that. These are interconnected. Instead of teaching just one, and struggling readers, severely struggling readers, often struggle with the phonetic system. So instead of trying to teach a one-handed person to clap, we need to develop all 3 word recognition systems. Recognizing words is different from identifying words. To recognize a word, it's in your lexicon, the dictionary in your head. You see it in print, and you instantly know what it is. Aha! I recognize you. To identify words, you see it, you don't know what it is, you can't recognize it, you need a strategy. They are different. We must understand the difference. Word recognition's cueing systems, again, it's not a strategy, it's not an approach, it's not a method, it's not something that you teach. It's merely a recognition that our brain uses multiple sources of information, not just letters, as we are reading to create meaning with print. That's recognition, word recognition systems. Now, close activities. I had a dream. These take 3 to 8 minutes a day, maybe 10. I can use them to reinforce letter sounds. I had a B. I teach children to say blank or just the first letter and then look for clues. And sometimes we list them. I had a bad dream. Yes. And I have anywhere from 6 to 10 of these. And again, 3 to 8 to 10 minutes at most. It teaches them to use context. And this is, again, one part. Amaze is when they have a sentence. They have either 2 or 3 words to choose from. I like this for sight words. Use different sight words here. Randy blank in bed. Randy was in bed. Only one of them makes sense. And by the way, when we're doing maze in close, we're also developing what's called metacognition. Thinking about thinking. Does it make sense? Does it make sense? That is an important reading skill. Did what I read make sense? Close and maze develops those. All right, here is word identification. You don't recognize the word, you're reading it. It's in your lexicon, so you need to consciously employ a strategy to recognize it. I don't know what this word is. I think I will use analogy, looking for word families or large units. The steps: look at the word. Step 2, look for parts you know. Step 3, make a guess based on that. Number 4, see if your guess makes sense. That's analogy. Morphemic analysis. By the way, this whole thing about guessing at words, even with phonics, we make a guess. When you sound a word out, you see if it makes sense. You make a guess. The word is neurocognitive. Does that make sense within the sentence? Yes, it does. All right, morphemic awareness, smallest unit of meaning, prefix, suffix, roots. Do you recognize a part of that? Context clues, what makes sense, and phonics. And we teach these 4 word identification strategies very directly using explicit instruction. And a strategy is something you consciously employ. We need to consciously employ these strategies. A skill, in a cognitive sense, is something that's done automatically. So we teach the strategy to develop the skill. Thinking moves from outside to in. As we're teaching these strategies, students eventually learn to do these without thinking, eventually learn to look for familiar parts or for morphemes or to use context or to use letter clues. They internalize it. That Vygotskian idea that thinking starts on the social plane and is gradually internalized. Daily reading practice, reading volume is linked to almost everything. Improve fluency, comprehension, word identification, conceptual knowledge. Every day, the best thing you could do is provide 10 to 30 minutes of self-selected reading, where children are able to choose books, select books that they want to read at their independent level or below. And that means having a good selection in your classroom library and books that are of varying levels. You're able to practice the skills learned in authentic context. Could you get better at anything without practicing? You get better at playing the piano by practicing. You get better at playing tennis by practicing. You practice using the skills in authentic tennis and piano playing and reading context. Reading practice should be an essential part. Reading widely enhances comprehension, word identification, and fluency skills, vocabulary, and conceptual knowledge. Absolutely. Now, Nancy Atwell recommends that 70 to 80% of reading class be used for self-selected reading practice, and we should call it reading practice instead of reading class, and only 20 to 30 for skills work. And I would posit that we've got those turned around. We tell children to find a book to read after they've got their work done, but finding and enjoying good books should be the work of reading class. Helping children fall in love with books is a teacher's #1 job. The sixth part, literacy is a social process. Children should be talking, having conversation around good books and around their writing, and there's a variety of ways to do it. But social interaction enhances high-level thinking, literacy learning, and enables students to learn content knowledge more deeply. Talk is an important part of becoming fully literate. A variety of activities, close reading, shared reading, book talks, literature circles, book clubs, evaluations and critiques, top 10 lists, journal entries and responses, planned discussions. Think about that. When you have read a book that you love, you want to talk about it. When you see a movie you love, you want to talk about it. When you read something interesting, you want to talk about it. Teachers' number one job is to help their students fall in love with books. Authentic writing. The reading-writing connection is well established. Comprehensive literacy should include authentic writing, where students are able to write about and share their ideas, their experiences. Writing develops the letter-sound connection and phonemic awareness at the younger levels. It's also the best way to develop the syntactic cueing system, grammar and word order. And these writing activities need not be long. They could be used as pre- or post-reading activities. They could be used to reinforce letter sounds. Boys and girls, in this story, Alfred got mad. He was angry. Describe a time when you were mad. And they get some ideas out. They draft. When you see their pencils start to lose energy, all right, take a minute and share in your small group. That is writing. It's fun, it's interesting, and it enhances reading. Number 8, comprehension instruction. And there's two parts to this. Part 1 is developing the cognitive processes related to creating meaning. And that's usually used with narrative text, predicting, inferring, cause-effect, supporting statements. And we teach these cognitive processes to develop the skills, so we do these automatically. And I like using graphic organizers to teach inference and predicting and cause and effect. And part 2 is study skill strategies used with informational text, used with expository text. And here are different kinds. Students need to know that you read a textbook different than you read a Harry Potter textbook. Dot and note, take notes, preview, overview. These are all strategies starting in 4th grade for how to read expository text. And you must teach these explicitly. Even at the undergraduate level, I'm having to remind and teach my students how to read a textbook. Activities to develop word knowledge, vocabulary, absolutely, activities. Now, you can't direct instruction your way to expanded vocabulary because children learn 3,000 to 5,000 new words a year. Wide reading is the best way to do it, as well as good conversation. But there are a variety of strategies outside, beyond this presentation for adding depth and dimension to students' word knowledge. Planned and purposeful vocabulary inclusion is one of the ways, but wide reading is probably the best way. The affective element, emotion and motivation. We read and we emote, we learn and we emote with the same brain. It's silly to think that one would not impact the other. There are 6 basic human emotions, and an emotion is a physiological response. But only one of these enhance learning, and that's happiness, that's joy. The negative emotions impact or impede learning. If we have a positive emotion related to something, we're more likely to want to do it. If we relate reading books to something pleasurable, we're more apt to do it again. A reading teacher's number one job is to help children fall in love with books. After that, much of reading class takes care of itself. Negative emotions impede learning. We have to stop frustrating, humiliating, and boring our kids. If you're working with a student, you see them frustrated, you have to shut it down. Find stuff at their independent level. Stop using the one-size-fits-all curriculum and approaches. Our children are not standardized products. And we expect there to be differences. We celebrate differences. We set goals based on our students' ability. Students are not trains starting and stopping, arriving at designated times. We're all wonderfully different. And as well, we don't frustrate our kids. We teach within the zone of proximal development. We find students independent level and we get just a little ahead of that, and we provide structure so that they're able to do it. And since our students are at all different levels, we have to have instruction that meets their needs. There is a place for small group and independent instruction. Absolutely. Number 11, reading fluency. If this is an issue, fluency is the ability to quickly recognize words and process text during reading. There are 3 deficit areas: word identification, fluency, and comprehension. Fluency should be attended to only if that is an issue. Not all struggling readers are the same. Some struggle with one of these, some 2 of them, some all 3. That means that intervention must be based on the specific deficit area or areas. The way we address fluency is much different than the way we address comprehension or the way we address word identification. With fluency, we use repeated reading and other activities. Automatically recognize words frees up space in short-term memory for word recognition and comprehension. That's why fluency is important. And the last element, recognizing that students have language and literacy experiences outside a school environment, and we want them to bring these experiences, their way of seeing, of reading, of talking, of relating, into the classroom and build on these. We don't expect them to leave their culture behind at the classroom door. We want them to bring this in. There are 12 interacting and interconnecting elements. Phonemic awareness and phonics, usually that's at the early levels. You should not be doing phonemic awareness after grade 1. Systems theory is an interacting, interconnected, and interdependent set of elements working together to form a unified whole. You manipulate one, you manipulate all of them. These are interconnected elements. This is a comprehensive approach to literacy. Now, the 5 pillars, which the National Reading Panel has identified, sometimes it's called foundational skills, they only address 5 of them. They're 7 pillars short of a full load. The science of reading tends to focus only on 2 pillars. They're 12 pillars short. Comprehensive recognizes the interdependent and interactive nature of these 12 elements.